I just want to take a quick moment to let you know that my Patreon page is currently up and running. Supporters will get access to early art, craft patterns, coloring pages, books, and more, delivered as projects are finished. If you have an OC, patrons can also sign up for their characters to appear in Little Beirut. You'll get free copies of every book your character appears in, even if your membership ends before your plot or arc completes. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this on your feed. So this is a piece that kind of really annoyed some of the kids on TikTok. I was using my art dolls, I was using stock photos, and people who don't know that that's allowed tend to get really irritated when they see other people use it. So I kind of got a lot of hell for one of the ones that went absolutely bonkers. But this was a commission. It's one of the sketchbook commissions that I'm working on. So I need to be able to go quickly on them, and art dolls and stock photos really make that easy. This is also an older piece. I filmed this back at the beginning of October, and if you've been watching this channel, you might know that I only started learning how to do watercolor around September. So I'm still fairly new to this, but I'm comfortable enough with it that I have been putting it into sketchbook commissions. And the reason why you're seeing this now is because a lot of times I will film videos and then not release them. I will hold on to them in case something comes up and I either aren't able to record anything or I don't have time or whatever. And if you missed the last video on Friday, I hurt my shoulder really badly. I believe what I did was I hurt it in because I am that kind of old where I will sprain my shoulder in my sleep. And I woke up and like it was kind of weird, like, ooh, that doesn't feel right. But I didn't really think anything of it, and it had been bothering me for about a week. And then on Tuesday, my husband and I decided to go out for a walk. And we walked for about 2 miles just looking at Christmas lights, and it was very lovely. And by the time we got home, my hip was killing me because I have really bad hip problems. And I walk with a cane because of it, so getting home from a 2-mile walk in the cold and the rain, it was not surprising that my hip hurt, so I went to go take a nap. And I woke up and something in my shoulder popped, and it was excruciating pain. It was awful. I had actually thought that my shoulder was dislocated. That's what it felt like, and my husband came back to check. There wasn't anything wrong that he could see. It was like a little swollen. And it turns out I have sprained my shoulder and can't really use my left arm at all. I'm left-handed. I use my cane on my left side. So that's fun. I know it looks like I'm using my right hand here because I am. I'm pretty sure I was trained out of being left-handed when I was very young because that's the only thing I seem to be able to do with my left hand or with my right hand any kind of reliably. Everything else I tend to default to my left, so it's been fun this last week. Most of this last week I've spent in bed sleeping because it's about the only thing I can do. But I'm on better pain management, so I feel a little bit better. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning on Monday. So you guys will see this in about 12 hours. So that's been my week. How's yours? Anyway, let's actually talk about the art. So this is, like I said earlier, I've only been recently learning watercolor, and this was maybe the 3rd or 4th real serious piece that I did. The pieces that you've seen on this channel have been my entire document and my watercolor. I'm not that good at it, but you know, I'm getting good enough at it to where I have been feeling comfortable enough to put it into these sketchbook commissions. So this fella is Jasper, and I didn't really know a whole lot about him going in. I actually had to do a ref sheet for him after this once I got a little bit more information, but I wanted to get started. And I didn't know a whole lot about the character. The only thing that I really had was a picture of him kind of looking grumpy, looking down on his phone, so that's what I went with. And everything else I just kind of had to wing it. So to do the color, because even though I'm doing watercolor, I don't actually like that splotchy watercolory look. It looks great on other people's artwork. I don't like it on mine. So instead, I'm doing these really transparent color washes where it's mostly water and then just a little itty bitty bit of pigment, and then I just do multiple layers to build that up and create something. My brain is starting to shut down. This is like my 8th time recording this because Premiere keeps glitching and cutting out parts of my voiceover, so I'm doing this in Audacity, and if it sounds really weird today, that's why. I just don't feel like restarting my computer right now. But I'm just mostly picking random colors for my local color. If you saw my CouchCon panel, would have been about a week ago, I did a lot of talking about how the local color that you pick works a lot better when you don't think about it from a perspective of what necessarily looks good, which sounds really weird, and when you take yourself out of the equation. So I tend to design my rooms and my environments not necessarily based on something that I would want to live in, or even that I think really looks good. Like, I've got this weird green that I'm using, and these shades of blue, and these bright red at all. As a story, they kind of come together that way. So he's got these mismatched blue blankets on his bed. The walls are green. He has these mismatched pillowcases. And then the headboard and the tables all match. They're all made out of the same wood. And that just kind of tells a little bit of a story. And it tells us not really a linear story, not an actual story, but it gives you an idea about the character and about the kind of environment the character likes to live in. So that's what I was going for here with this absolutely bizarre and bonkers color scheme that you can see here. It's meant to be a little bit silly, but it all comes together very well in the end. And I just lay down this really smooth local color the same way that I would digitally or with markers or any other media. I just really like this smooth color. I think it makes for the best base, and then you can add texture over top. And what I'm doing, and for the posters on the wall, is I am painting with just clear, clean water. And then I put paint on top of the water, and that kind of helps it wick out and make these interesting shapes. I didn't want to go through the hassle of drawing each individual poster and trying to convey actual shapes, because that was time I didn't really have. This actually took me about 10 hours all told, between the sketch, the lightboard process to get it into the sketchbook, and then the inking, and the painting alone took over 6 hours. So I didn't want to give myself any more work than was necessary, so doing these kind of abstract pieces on the paintings was the easiest way to do it. And I threw a lot of red into them because this character is bright red, and he would have been a very real focal point, I feel like, if I hadn't given some more red to the... He is the main focal point, and if you notice, I actually cropped it because it was portrait, and now it is landscape. Because when it was the other direction, there was too much ceiling, too much floor, and the character was really small. So by flipping it and cropping it down, I was able to get more of the character in there, which meant that I lost the glow stars that I wanted to put on the ceiling. I even kind of tried to at one point, I think, but decided not to because it was just a little bit too much work, honestly. But this one was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from it. I made a few mistakes that we'll talk about a little bit later, but for the most part, I love it. It's one of my favorite pieces I have done, not just this year, but in a really long time. So it's a really nice one. I really like this one. And I'm just kind of going through, I think, what was I mixing? I can't tell what colors I'm mixing here. It's really hard to tell. Definitely Okay, I've done this way too many times. I don't know what order anything's going in. I am just so confused. But so I was talking about randomly picking colors for the local color. And you can see that I'm doing that here. I've got 2 different shades of purple and then some orange for the pillows, kind of implying that he doesn't really care that his bed doesn't match. The pillows don't match the blankets don't match the sheets. It's all just kind of all over the place. And that's what really helps build up a story within your piece. And I think that's what takes a drawing and turns it into an illustration, and it turns it into a scene. And then once you finish with the local color, then you can go through and add the atmosphere and the environment around it, which that's where it almost fell over. Because I've got 2 lamps and a window in this scene. And the window, when I was doing this, because I was also live streaming this on TikTok while I was recording it on my computer, I noticed that it was a window until quite later on, almost at the very end, was when people noticed that it was a window and not another poster. But it's weird because I thought I did a good job at drawing that to look like a blanket, the way it sags down from that one tack in the corner and then it's not quite even, the way I took care to put perfectly straight lines on all of the posters and things, which I know a lot of people really don't like straight lines in their art, but I do a lot of perspectives and I like to do a lot of really intense angles. This one not so much because it was just a very quick stock photo draw over, but the more intense an angle and the more perspective there is in a scene, the more it helps feel real, I think. So straight lines there, you can slightly curve them, but I do like them to actually be straight and to not just be kind of straight, which that has its own place. Absolutely, that there's a reason why people would do that. I've done it a few times, but for pieces like this, I do really like straight lines. It's I know it's very boring, but it helps with the perspective, so I do it. But what wound up really becoming kind of an issue is that I have these 3 potential light sources, 4 if you count these Christmas lights, which I have these little neon pans in this watercolor set. I have some neon pans, so I was using that for the Christmas lights, and they do actually glow under a black light. That's what I was just showing to the TikTok people, is that they glow, and they glow really nicely. I think I've shown this set on this channel before. And then what I wanted to do was start doing this kind of a luminosity layer, the same way that I would if I were working in Psy or Procreate, use a luminosity layer. And fluorescent stuff that came with the Doodle Hog set, and then I remembered I've got all of this Stuart Semple paint, and that would really get me to the intensity that I wanted. And I'm so sad about it because I just found out yesterday he is closing his store. So if you've been wanting to get yourself some Stuart Semple paints, now is the time, apparently. I need to get myself as much as I can, probably get a couple of packs of lit and just spend way too much money. So if you want to enable me to do that, please check out my Patreon. I will link it down below. But what I wanted to do was only have 2 light sources, because having 3 was going to be way too much. Was just going to be way too much to deal with, so I decided that the background lamp was going to be off and the foreground lamp was going to be on. And then there would be some exterior light coming from behind the blanket that's over the window. So right now I was just kind of mixing my washes so that I had them ready to go and I could... But in this case I wanted my light source to really be intense. A lot of times when I'm just being kind of quick, I will do some rim lighting, even where rim lighting doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But in this case, because the light is right there, the lamp is right next to him, I wanted large portions of the character and the bed to be in harsh light. So I used just these simple paints in very, very light washes to lay down everywhere that there is that light hitting it from the lamp. And I kind of had some problems with this one because there was the issue of multiplying shadows, which is kind of a weird concept and it's hard to explain succinctly, but if you've ever looked at like Photoshop or Procreate, you'll notice that there are blending modes for your layers that look like math. There's multiply, add, and subtract, and I think divide. What that means is the number value of the color, so the RGB value between 0 and 255. What it does when you have that on a layer and then you put a layer on top and you set it to multiply, it will multiply the values between the two layers and give you something very dark. That there's some kind of algorithm-y math that makes it actually work. So having two different light sources meant that my shadows would multiply where they would meet from the two different light sources. If you only have one light source and two shadows overlap, they become the same shadow and it doesn't get any darker. What it means when shadows multiply is you have two different light sources, and where the shadows from those two different light sources meet, they overlap and they get darker in the overlap, which is something that's very easy to do digitally. I do it all the time digitally. I've never done it traditionally. So trying to do watercolor, I was still very new to watercolor, while also having never done it on paper before in my life was kind of daunting, but I really wanted to try. So I was just putting down the conflicting washes, switching between doing the yellow and doing the blue. And what wound up happening with the blue was that it looked more like shading than it did highlight. And it was really kind of starting to get on my nerves a little bit. So I took a gel pen and I went over everything that I wanted to actually be blue highlight, which didn't work at all. It absolutely did not work. I'm not sure why it didn't work. It just didn't. Probably because the paper was wet. I don't know. But then later on, the gel pen that did manage to go down actually worked as more of a mask and turned out way better than I ever even wanted it to, and you'll see that in a little bit. So I was just switching back and forth between doing the different highlights and lighto and then the yellow lighting from the lamp and switching between those, and then I went on to the shading. And this is where it almost got ruined. And because this is on a sketchbook, I couldn't have just started over. I had to go with what I had. And this was going to be a really big wash. I knew I was going to need a lot of it, so I was going to need a lot of paint, and trying to get that much paint out of a pan is so hard sometimes. So I grabbed some liquid watercolor, which I've done this a few times, and it never works. I think mainly because most of my liquid watercolor is frickin' gouache. And when you put gouache in a wash, despite the fact that they sound the same, it doesn't work. What winds up happening is that the pigments in the wash, the particles are too big, and they fall down to the bottom, so the wash gets lighter and lighter, and then you have to stir it, and then it's all of a sudden really dark. And so I kept running into that. I couldn't keep very consistent coloring at all, which gave me this really dirty, grungy look, which almost helped it in a weird way. At the end it did come together, but I am never using liquid watercolors on these again. I will suffer through trying to get the pigment out of a pan if it kills me. So this is what we have here. It just was so awkward. And what I was doing first was doing the shading from the lamp. And because the lamp has a really bright yellow light, I wanted to do the shading in blue. So it's kind of this really dark, desaturated, bluish gray that the shading is. And then when I did it from the window, which has a blue light, I did the shading in brown. And what that does is creates contrast between the two different light sources so that you can kind of kind of see that they're two different light sources, rather than, oh, I messed up. Because where the white light is hitting the areas of him that are in shadow, that's going to... So if it gets brightened up by white or blue, it will turn them more blue. If it gets brightened up by yellow, it will turn that more yellow. So you'll see that in a little bit where that really starts to come together. And that's where I realized that I screwed up and was using gouache and then almost cried because, oh my god. But it worked in the end. Just oof, oh my god, everything. I do really like how this one turned out, though. But this one was a learning experience, I think, is probably the best way to put that. I definitely learned a lot more than I did with Penny, and it turned out absolutely amazing. I think I said that this is one of my favorite pieces I've done in a long time, maybe ever, maybe not ever, but in a long time, for sure. And watercolor is something that, I think I've mentioned this before too in other videos, I've always had a weird relationship with it. It's always either intimidated me, a really childish medium, because for a long time the only watercolors I had been exposed to were the really lame Crayola ones. I didn't know that there were like actual artist grade watercolors, and learning that was just a mind blower. And then they became really intimidating because every time I looked at how to use them, I was looking at how someone else would use them with their own style and never really took the time to figure out how to use them with my style. So now I'm just shading him, making sure that the colors are down, making sure that everything on the bed is shaded according to where the light is being thrown from the lamp. And you can see that even the lamp in the background has a shadow where the one in the foreground doesn't. I tried to add actually a little bit of a hot spot on the one in the foreground so that you can see that there's a light bulb inside, but it's a lot harder to lighten with watercolor than it is to darken, it turns out, but you know, that's fine. But now that I was kind of starting to see it as a whole and really seeing where it was going, I was adding a lot of shadow. I wanted to add a little bit more. I meant to do some in kind of a purple, but I wound up, I think, doing it in brown instead, which, again, actually really worked. So this was where I kind of was really getting fed up, though, with that wash, because every time I put it down, it was too dark. Every single time. And then I had to be careful about my lights. I didn't want to shade around my lights because they would be throwing light. And I was trying to get this really even gradient between the corner of the room and spreading out toward the light sources. So this whole thing, this was the point where I was like, I might have to start over. And I don't know how to start over on a sketchbook page that's supposed to be a big cohesive unit. So it got there in the end, but oh my god, this was scary. This was so scary. Also, I forgot to shade the guitar. Completely and totally forgot to shade the guitar in the background. Like, it wound up just covered in wash. It doesn't have any actual shading to its form. But I think right around here was when people finally started to notice on the live stream that this was a blanket and not a poster, because I was able to give it some more form with some shading, and then I had the light just really shining from behind it. And it worked really well. How I did the light behind it was just, I kept taking water and lifting up as much watercolor as I could, which mostly worked. I can't remember if I put any of the gel pen down with it. I might have done. I can't remember. I guess we'll see later. But already, you can really see where that gel pen on the character kind of masked some of the shading, especially on his legs and his feet. I think there's a little bit like around his chest and belly too. And then at this point, I can't tell. Yeah, I think I'm using brown now to shade where the light from the window is not hitting, but also having to be careful to keep it out of where the light from the lamp is directly hitting. So there's a lot of areas where that will overlap, and then a lot of areas where there's no shading at all because there's direct color. And for having never done this in traditional art and being very new to watercolor, I love how this turned out. It really helped with the three-dimensional look. I really love the atmosphere that it gave it. At this point, though, he was like standing out way too much. So I was, again, kind of getting nervous. Didn't really like what was going on. And so I decided, well, what I'm just going to do then is just do this with the whole thing. Anywhere that there is not direct light, so anywhere where there's none of the yellow wash, I just put down this brown. And it really helped. The whole thing finally came together, kind of hid some of that really gross splotchiness that I really didn't like. And you can really see here, like especially on the bed, where those shadows will multiply, where the brown comes up and then goes over the blue, and the blue where the brown overlap just gets really dark. And that's what did it. That was what did it. Finally got the gradient on the headboard that I was going for. I finally got the gradient in the walls that I was going for. Had to add a few little areas of just hard highlight, but this was it. This was where I was going with it. And then I took an even lighter wash and did everything, even where the light was hitting directly. And at this point, I started to fall in love. This was where I wanted it to go. I wish I had been able to work out how to get kind of this purple gradient for the atmosphere shadow, but I'm happy with this, and you can really see again on his legs and on his chest how that gel pen wound up just creating this gorgeous mask. And I did the same thing with his lights up there on the ceiling as well, his little Christmas lights, his fairy lights, whatever you want to call them. But oh boy, love this one. Absolutely love this one. And I'm not sure how many of these I will be able to show you, especially right now, because I can't sit at my desk very well. I can't draw at my desk or paint at my desk. Everything kind of has to be in bed where I can use one hand. I don't have a good setup here. And there's a couple of really big pieces that I don't think I can work on at all right now. So it's kind of awkward, but this is Jasper. This is book 1 for this person's sketchbook. I love these Christmas lights. They turned out so good. The whole thing turned out so good. But let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you hated it. I want to hear both. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, all that fun stuff. And I will see you next time. Bye!